We are joined for the next 25 minutes by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. He's an American economist, and he's, of course, a syndicated columnist as well. He's a former editor of the Wall Street Journal and Business Week, and he is the father of Reaganomics, and he's really needs no introduction to our audience. We have a lot of new stations, a lot of new listeners, so I guess he does. And we'll give you his website address as well on screen coming up here in just a moment. We also carry his work at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. But before I go any further, I just want to cover the waterfront with him to make sense of what's going on in the economic meltdown, clearly a global depression. This Market Watch article, scary 1929 market chart, gains traction. Government is gearing up for a collapse. I think we're going into a slow collapse, but I want to get an update from him on that. But first, the reason I wanted to get him on last week, and now he's here, is to talk about Ukraine. And again, I'm not a Putinite, but compared to what we've got, our system's so bad, he's not aggressively trying to expand things. He stopped the Syria war, the purge of Christians. Clearly, the Saudi Arabians are bombing them because they didn't go along with the takeover of Syria to destabilize the Olympics. But you see Ukraine not voting at first to go with the EU. And now Russia is not even trying to control Ukraine from what I've seen. I want a free and independent Ukraine. And George Soros's people are all over this, as usual, trying to destabilize Russia because they want a new world order run by the Wall Street kleptocrats. They want a new world order run by anti-free market folks that make the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, look like a saint. That's the bottom line. This is not America doing this to Russia. This is criminal elements doing it, in my view. I want Dr. Roberts' take on that. So there's the preface of my questions and how I see it. This is a big deal, though, to be trying to overthrow Ukraine, and audio recordings of this, obviously, with ambassadors coming out, and a very serious situation. Dr. Roberts, give us your expert breakdowns. I know you were in big talks with the Russians so they'd bring down their empire at the end of the Reagan administration. I know that you know a lot of these folks. You know the French. You've gotten their highest award for some of the work you've done on that front as well. What's really happening right now?
In the Ukraine, there was a joint effort initially between the EU and Washington to bring the to bring the Ukraine into NATO and into EU. Now, the EU just wanted an expansion of its domain. Washington wanted to have the Ukraine incorporated into NATO so they can put more military bases on Russia's frontier. And they also want to have their puppets running the country so that it can be opened up for looting by the American banks and the American corporations. You know, like, for example, Latvia was. So what has happened is for many years, Washington and also the EU have been financing what are called NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in Ukraine. Last December, this Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State who's running the operation, the American operation there, told the National Press Club that Washington had invested $5 billion in agitation in the Ukraine. And so what we're witnessing now is all of these NGOs, some of them pretend to be human rights organizations, some pretend to be educational, to teach democracy, some are just provocative. They have used these, that is the State Department, the CIA, have used these institutions, these NGOs, to have this ongoing protest. Now, the EU and Washington have now fallen out over this because the EU has realized that for Washington to take over the Ukraine is a direct threat to Russia. And they realize that Russia can cut Europe off from oil and natural gas, and they realize that if there's a war, Europe will be destroyed.
And that's why we don't need Ukraine to fall to the EU that's going to suck it dry. That's like asking to have cancer implanted in you. Clearly predatory. As you know, their own EU documents have come out that it was a planned program to consolidate and suck countries dry. So the Ukrainians vote to not join it. And so they have hordes of paid operatives take to the streets. It'd be one thing if these were real, Ukrainians wanting to get rid of their government. But clearly these are foreign, manipulated, saboteur operatives by every benchmark.
Well, the NGOs are financed by the West, and they have provoked it. But I think most of the people out there are just dupes. They're Ukrainians.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, the Western Ukraine is...
Sure, I'm talking about the NGOs that are made up of Ukrainian operatives.
Sorry?
I was talking about the NGOs themselves, doctors.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was in Washington when they decided to create the National Endowment for Democracy, which is sort of the parent organization for these NGOs. And the explicit purpose given was that it would be used to destabilize Eastern Europe and Soviet republics, and would be used for the benefit of American hegemony. And that's the reason it was created. And so we've seen it operate in many places. They tried to achieve that revolution, that color revolution in the Ukraine. What do they call it? The Orange Revolution, I think.
Yes, they've tried over and over again.
And they came very close to getting the Ukraine then. And
they tried to have Georgia start a war with Russia. A very dangerous situation. What do you expect Russia to do? I mean, they're starting to really get in more of a fighting stance.
Well, I don't know what they will do. One prospect is the country will split apart because the eastern Ukraine is more Russian. It's Russian Orthodox. The western Ukraine is less Russian. It's Catholic. And I think that it's really two countries, and what you may see is a split. What I find so distressing is that the Ukrainians I think these protests are largely in the western part.
No, they are. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and so what I find distressing is that these protesters are such dupes that they're destroying the independence of their own country.
Many anthropologists and archaeologists believe that before man even discovered the power to harness and use fire, we were involved in agrarian activities. That is, taking the seeds of plants and then replanting them to produce more. The very foundation of our modern civilization and human culture is centered around the planting and cultivation of edible plants.
Here are some of the amazing deals at InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
The Survival Seed Vault by My Patriot Supply features only the finest survival heirloom seeds for a robust and hardy garden, even in the toughest times. We also have starter varieties of the deluxe seed packages for fruit, salad, salsa, peppers, medical herbs, and more.
Go to the InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
And remember, the revolution against tyranny is growing.